Hi folks, Jason here. So in this video, I'm going to be going through how to generate a character for narrative and storytelling. And echoing what we did in class, it's just basically going to be going over the process of just how to sketch really, and also how to build characters through geometric shapes and applying rendering. And then outside of that, things that you'd need to consider, things like, general anatomy, drawing faces, hands, as well as clothing, looking at cloth and doing cloth studies. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm just going to zoom in on some of the text here, and we'll just have a look at what we're attempting to do. So the workshop that we did today was centering on what the character was about, like what the role was, like with a kind of like hero, villain, mentor, psychic. I think I decided basically I was going to do a hero. So that was going to be my sort of take on it. A kind of classic hero, I guess, something like, the hero that goes to, kill the dragon, as it were. So sort of hero, and then the hero would be on a quest. So from there, it would be a quest. And then from there would be essentially there would be trials. So from there, you're looking at basically sort of trials. So this is before they kind of get to the dragon. There'd be essentially maybe other monsters to kind of fight, things like that. And then there'd be the actual, the final boss, as it were, which would be the dragon, right? And so you'd have the sort of dragon at the end of it, and the dragon, perhaps they don't beat the dragon initially, maybe even they lose, but then they kind of come back bigger and stronger and sort of defeat the dragon themselves, and then go back home and tell the tales. So looking at that as a possibility of what they're going to do. Then it comes to doing the character. And of course, this is where research comes in. And before we get into that, it's always a good idea. I'm just going to do it now, which is to start any drawing project that you're going to be doing. It's just start by drawing some shapes. And the classic ones are just drawing things like circles, drawing squares. It's just a way of like sort of warming up the same way you say, you would do an instrument. Right? It's just kind of warming up. And then again, if you've done a little bit of sort of perspective work or things like that, and again, I can do a separate video on that. You could then look at, say, in fact, if we just go back to, let's have a look at, say, here, we could have a look at, maybe instead of just doing a circle, we could do a sphere, right? And you could do that basically by doing a bit of shading. So, you kind of draw a kind of circle, and let's say the light's kind of coming from that direction. You can sort of, this is very good practice for, particularly if you're doing drawings where you're trying to get the values or just trying to get the volume. I highly recommend trying to do this, just start drawing shapes, in 3D. So you could do, like a little sort of drop shadow there, something like that for the sphere. And then for the square, that would now be a sort of cube. So you could do this kind of, again, this involves a little bit of perspective, but essentially you'd end up sort of drawing, say, something like that. You could always just have a go and just kind of, try it out anyway. But I'm just going to sort of draw it out. Essentially, it's like you need sort of perspective lines to basically create the illusion of perspective. So something like this. So yeah, some kind of drop shadow. You can have, say, there. And again, just using the smudge tool. And of course, you could do this just with your thumb if you're doing it by pencil. Do something like that. And of course, for the triangle, you could do something like a pyramid. So you could do something like this. or again, it's quite tricky sort of perspective, to do this in perspective. Or something like it could also be a cone as well. That's another thing as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a pyramid. You could have something like that. And again, just practice with doing sort of values. So just do a bit of something like that, and also adding a drop shadow. I highly recommend doing stuff like this in your sketchbook and just drawing. If you want to kind of improve your drawing, I highly recommend just practicing a lot. Doing still life, drawing figures, drawing people, even things like that. So you could carry on like that and just try some other things. You could maybe just try just doing some lines, right? So you could just take this down a little bit at the size of the brush, and maybe just try, you could try some cross hatching as well. It's mainly involved in just kind of warming the hand up and just seeing what works. And you could even just do some, some squiggly shapes like so. And you could even try bending some of this geometry. So, could even take, one thing I didn't do actually was a cylinder. So a cylinder, you'd have it as, say, something like this, like a tube. And again, you could sort of, just blend that, put a little drop shadow in there, that kind of thing. But you could sort of take this tube now and say, okay, or cylinder, and say, okay, let's just try bending it. So you could do stuff like this in, of course, in like Blender and Maya, where you can sort of take that shape and see what it looks like when you try and sort of deform it. So, you'd have something like that, say, for example. And if this had sections, it'd probably look something like that, right? And again, you could add a bit of sort of shading to it, just to kind of give that kind of maybe even like a sort of drop shadow of sorts. Maybe it's just hovering off the ground, slightly, something like that. And then we'll just kind of blur that a little bit. They're just good practices. It gets you in the mood for drawing, and you're not looking at perfection with anything like this. It's just mainly about warming the hand up, practicing, and basically preparing yourself for then doing some some actual drawing, some figure drawing, or it could be props, it could be anything really, landscapes. So so something like that. And once you're kind of happy, once you're kind of like, what, I think I'm pretty good, and I'm ready to kind of get on and do the drawing. This is really when you sort of come on to the next stage. So if I just kind of zoom in a little bit there and just sort of go to the text. So we've done the warm up. We've done these kind of, spheres and cubes, pyramids, triangles, and of course you can do like a cylinder. And then comes on to doing the character in a sort of V pose. And as I mentioned in class, this would be sort of 7 to 8 heads tall. Male is generally 2.5 heads wide, the body. Female is 2 heads wide. These are like sort of standards, really. It's not like a one size fits all, but it's a way of kind of drawing figures. And as I mentioned here, you can sort of start with a stick figure and then add forms and the face and the guy line. So that's what we're going to do next. So before we do that, though, it'd be good just to kind of have a look at things like reference. So if I just bring it over to the character here, this is mainly like sort of with clothing, but like this knight type character looking at the pose. So this is what would be sort of classed as like a sort of V pose. It's just more like a sort of not an idle stance or whatever, but a character that's kind of stood there. This is quite stylized kind of character. This is probably a little bit more realistic. But basically, we're going to be doing something obviously not like that. The character I had in mind for the hero was going more in line with, sort of like it would be more like sort of like the Hobbit or something like that. So there'd be probably like more like in a sort of cape, maybe a hood, something like that. Okay, so let us begin. And what I'll do is I'll click onto here now. So I'll click off that. And we're going to start kind of sketching the character in. So always good. So if you're doing this in Photoshop, you'd need to kind of have it on quite a low opacity. If you're drawing it, I think it's just a good idea just to use like light pencils, something like HB, maybe even F. Keep everything kind of light, because basically what we're going to be doing is these are going to be the sort of like, this is going to be the scaffolding for the character. And you can start off with something like, say, a line. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be sort of, make it about sort of 7 heads high. So what you can do is you could measure it if you like, or you could just sort of sight it by eye, and you could kind of look at it and kind of think, okay, that's kind of roughly, it's approximately like the same kind of distance. If you're doing a drawing, you'd probably do well to maybe use a ruler. You could do that and get the measurement exactly how you want it. So, so what we've got going on here, so we've got 1, we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. So this is going to be our character here. I might even be tempted just to kind of enlarge that, not too much, because I'm going to have the character kind of standing on some ground. So yeah, so something like that. And then what you start off with is essentially, if you just go back to the shapes, you're kind of using similar shapes to this. So for example, for the head, it's going to be more like a sphere, but more like you could say like an oval, right? It's going to be ovular. So if I just go and zoom in, it's going to be more like a sort of sphere that's been sort of stretched. Yeah, so you're kind of stretching the sphere into a kind of oval shape. Not going to do any shading or anything like that. So he's going to keep it as is. And then as we work our way down, we're going to go, okay, well, using some reference, some anatomy. In fact, it's generally a good idea looking at, when you're looking at stuff like, say, Pinterest is a really good resource. If we go like human anatomy, you could have a look at, say, something like, that's pretty good. If I'm going to be doing like a sort of male character, I can have a little scroll down and just see if there's anything else. But the top one's looking all right. These are generally good ones. This looks like, or similar to Andrew Loomis. You can find some of Andrew Loomis's work online, where he does a lot of like anatomical studies. In fact, I can kind of bring this in. If I just go and copy that, I can bring that into the scene. And I'll just change the type of layer. So I'll choose multiply, just so it blends in a bit more with the background. And then what I'll do is I'll just scale this down, because I'm just going to be using this as a reference really at the end of the day. Say something like that. Make sure you got your layer selected, of course, that you're drawing on. And I'll probably move this out of the way as I kind of go on. But essentially, looking at, if I just go and zoom in now again, if I go and zoom in, you should be able to see like the character here. So I could just do a quick demo on this. So this is probably more like the character I'd sort of be looking at doing. If I just go and change the color of the brush to say something like red, this is mainly just to kind of outline the areas that I'm going to try and break down. So I'll take up the opacity of it. If I now maybe just take that to just like 4 pixels, something like that, and look at, say, the head. So the head's going to be like an oval shape, like so. In fact, I might just take this scattering off just a second. The neck is going to be more like a sort of square. And again, I can maybe just change the color on that to like blue. So you could see like the neck is going to be more like sort of square. The shoulders here, they're going to be more like triangles. The body Let's make that a different color. Let's make that maybe even like something like pink. All right. The body is kind of square. In fact, let me just take that up a little bit more. So the body's kind of got this square, but it's kind of tapered, so it kind of tapers in at the bottom. The tops of the shoulders there, they're going to be more like ovals. That's going to be an oval there as well. This is going to be more like rectangular, and so on and so forth. So this is how we're going to sort of break it down. So I'm just going to put my scattering back, change the color now, go back to there, and scattering's turned on. There we go. And just zoom out, and I'm going to proceed with doing the drawing. So as I was stating, the neck is going to be a square, something like that. And then we've kind of got essentially the top of the torso, but just like on the illustration, we're going to put this kind of triangle in, say something like that. So it's all just geometric shapes for the time being, no details. We've got the main torso. So if I just scroll down a bit there, the main torso, again, it's a kind of box shape. So you got something like, say, that. And that will go to somewhere around about halfway. So say somewhere around about there before it kind of gets to the groin area. But of course, this is going to taper down. So you'd end up with something, say, like this. And then, of course, if you want to kind of just put some lines in, say, where the chest area is, you could do that. It just kind of delineates like some of the areas that, you perhaps just want to, just want to sort of define them a little bit more. And then we've actually got a bit of a rib cage going on here. So this is where you got the solar plexus here. But again, this is probably like touching a bit too much detail, but essentially it's something akin to that. That'll be so you got the chest area there, and the chest area would then sort of come down to the rib cage area where the solar plexus are, and then they'd have the sort of stomach, where the sort of like six pack would be, as it were, and the stomach would kind of like come in like so. But anyway, without putting any detail in just yet, the shoulders. So again, you could just have this in something like a V pose, and what I'm going to do here is kind of put, like on the illustration there, like a sort of sphere, and then like say another sphere, like something like that, and then this part of the arm. So remember as well if I would just kind of go a little bit further and kind of go, all right, so this is going to be we've got the sort of groin area here. And then the legs are going to be coming out. So if I just kind of scroll down even more, I'm just going to take that all the way sort of down to there, roughly around about there. That's kind of where the feet are going to kind of stand. And the legs are going to follow a similar trajectory, except instead of like using the circles, I'm going to use more like a sort of tapered rectangle. Let's say something like that. Now, what I'm going to do here is, because I'm using Photoshop, I'm just going to do one side and then flip it over, just copy it over onto the side. If you're drawing it, obviously, you can, there is a way around this. If you're doing, say, this on a drawing on A4, you could fold down the middle, go and find a window somewhere, and then literally draw on the other side. So you basically mirror in the other side. That's like a, fairly kind of crude way of doing it, but you kind of get the same results. So we've got the kind of knee there, which would be something like that. Now the arm, if I just zoom out a little bit, just so we can get a bit more perspective, right? The arm would actually need to be coming down say something like around about that. And the hand, again, you don't necessarily need to put any detail in, that much detail, but you could just do something like that, literally two triangles. But the hand needs to be coming just above the knee. So if you could even just check yourself and just stand up and just put your hand down on your thigh, and you'll see it's about, say, more or less about sort of like 3 to 4 inches away from your kneecap. And that's where the fingers, excuse me, would need to kind of be on your figure. Then you'd have, continuing with the leg, you could put in like a sphere and then another tapered kind of rectangle. Feet are always, I mean, feet and hands are generally quite difficult to do, but what you can do here is you can do like a sort of, basically like a tapered square, just so it's coming like that. Now, again, you can go into detail on this, but you can sort of leave that for the time being. So what we've got is we've got our arm, and we've got the forearm of the coming down here, and then the hand. Now, proportionally, this is kind of like looking okay. What I'll be aiming to do next is I'm just going to move this to maybe move it down there just for the time being. I'm going to go back to my character. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take, let's say, take part of that arm there and the leg. And basically, I'm just going to copy it over. You can draw it out, of course, but this is just for, time's sake. So I'm going to copy that, paste that, and then I'm just going to flip it over to the other side. Say something like that. Roughly something like that, and then just use the arrows. Okay, so we've kind of got the basics of the character. I'm just going to collapse that down now into my other layer there. Now, once you've kind of done that stage, you're ready really to go more into rendering and adding clothing. That would bring us to this section here. So we've done the warm up. We've done the neutral pose where we've kind of sketched it out. Use a bit of a stick figure and some shapes, and then basically from there we're going to start building, making it look a bit more organic. Adding clothing, things like that. And again, you can still keep things kind of like in a very loose, sketchy style. But essentially what I be doing is, from here, is obviously looking at reference and then going, right, okay, I'm going to start thinking about what I'm using, where I can kind of go with some of this. Like, as I mentioned before, it's good to kind of have a look at some materials and see how they fare. You could even sort of end up, drawing some of it before you even kind of commit to doing any of the drawing. But in the next part of the video, we're going to be basically starting to render the character, making it look a bit more organic, and then adding some clothing. So that'll be in the next part of the video. So in this part of the video, we're going to be looking at refining the illustration some more. So essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of center this a little bit. And if need be, what we can do is we can just drop the opacity down on the figure itself, because we've got this as scaffolding. Now, if you do this just drawing with pencil, what you can do is take a rubber and just kind of gently rub over. Don't rub it out, but just use a sort of rubber just to take the opacity down, and because we're essentially going to be using this as sort of guidance as much as anything else. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, so I might just take that down just a wee bit more. So it's around about there. I'm going to create another layer now. I'll just call this something like character render. I'll probably end up just merging the two of these layers together, but I'll just call this character render. Okay, and then basically just turn up the opacity on the brush there, and we'll start just trying to get it looking a bit more organic. So obviously people's heads aren't ovular like this. You can have a bit of shape. So if I go and zoom in, sometimes actually just at least just kind of blocking the head in a little bit more can really help set the trajectory for the rest of the body. So say something like doing a line for the nose, for the mouth, just helps to kind of create a sense of, like some kind of structure. We can get something for the eyebrows here. So whilst still trying to kind of resist putting any detail in, what I'm going to do is just maybe even just sketching some eyes in there. I'm not going to go to town too much on with the nose, but I just need to kind of get some sense of like what the character is going to be. It can make a big difference when it comes to the overall look. So we've kind of got this going on here. We've got like a jaw line here. We've got a cheekbones going here. Now the ears are going to fall somewhere in line with the top of these eyebrows. So probably even something like that. And again, this can all change, but I'm just going to kind of sketch that in to say something like that. Then we've got the kind of chin there. We've got the temples. And I'm not going to do any hair or anything like that for the time being. I'm just going to kind of keep it relatively simple. Say something like that, just for the time being. And then I'm going to start basically just trying to make the character's body look a bit more organic, because at the moment it kind of looks a bit robotic. So I'd start basically, so the jaw, we've got there, we're going to have the neck kind of coming down from the jaw, and we've got the shoulders coming out here. So I'm going to just thicken this a little bit just to kind of fit in with the head. And of course, we got the this kind of like dent. This is basically where the clavicle is. It's that bone, so you can feel it just above the chest, which kind of pokes out. And of course, here you've got your neck muscles kind of coming down like so, and things like that. And again, just like before, I'm going to sort of just concentrate on one side and then just flip it over. So we've kind of got this sort of chest area here. So I'm just going to, again, it's good to kind of look at reference. Now, you may recall from part one of this video, we've got the Loomis. If I go and click on that now, I can basically use this as a bit of, sort of reference. In fact, what I can do is I can take part of that, just that, and copy it. So I'll just copy that out. And then what I'll do is I'll just take that away and then paste that in there and just enlarge that. Now, this is just purely reference. I'm not going to use it for anything else for the time being. So we've kind of got that going on there. I'm just going to go and select my layer there and start looking at things like the chest, right? So you can see there, you kind of got this rib cage. So if I just go and zoom in, you can see we've kind of got this rib cage kind of, this, it's kind of like, how can you describe it? You've kind of got this gap here. This is kind of like the sternum. And then we kind of like underneath the skin, you've kind of got, well, you've got muscles, but also, maybe even some bone, depending on like, how thin the character is. But essentially, I'm going to start, looking at these areas here, for example. And you got the clavicle there kind of coming around. And I'm going to start looking at this kind of shoulder area. And of course, that kind of, this part of the chest kind of goes into, folds into that. You can look at things like muscle grouping and stuff, with anatomy, but we're just going to make it more impressionistic for now. And I'm going to bring that part down there. So basically, the muscles are going something like that. You kind of got a bit of a divide going on there. We've got this part of the muscle kind of going on like so. And that kind of coming down there. So that's not looking too bad so far. Then we've got this part of the forearm. And this is going to come out. So this has got the elbow behind there, but this is the forearm. And again, we kind of got this sort of crease with the muscle kind of going on there like so. And then it kind of, it's a sort of tricky shape because basically it's kind of coming down. It's kind of coming down like that. But it's a bit more nuanced because you're kind of getting like slightly angular, curved, where the muscle kind of comes down. And then you kind of got this part of the wrist. So it kind of twists there. So you can see that bit coming around. The actual hand itself, and again, hands are quite notoriously difficult to do, but essentially, I could probably do a separate tutorial on this, but the hands really are just basically squares. And you've got some kind of circles. And let's say, for example, you've got like a thumb here. That would be kind of like a square and maybe like a bit of a circle as well. And then you've got knuckles. So you'd have like the main knuckle there. Again, these would be circles. And then what you can do is, because you've got this kind of foreshortening going on, you're not going to see the hand fully splayed out. What you'll see, I know that the Andrew Loomis has kind of done like an impression, is I'd be tempted just to kind of have something, say, something like that with the kind of finger. And then with the rest of the fingers, what they'd be doing is they'd be kind of falling kind of behind, maybe something like that. You might see one of the fingers actually coming out on the other side like that. And again, I wouldn't spend too much time on there. So we've got that kind of sorted. Now you can see here on this side, we've got the arm coming up, but then we've got the rib cage, which kind of cuts in like so. And actually part of the rib cage as well is kind of coming in there. And we can kind of see that kind of coming down like so. And then we've kind of got this, usually got like a bit of sort of fatty deposit at the side there on the hips, which then comes into the hips. This is basically where you get into the kind of groin area. So you kind of got this navel area about here, the belly button, and then we come down to the sort of groin area, like so. So again, it's always good to kind of just zoom out a little bit and just kind of make sure that everything's kind of in perspective. And then you can start looking at, like I say, we've already got that shape there, but this actually curves out. So this would be where you got the buttocks basically behind here, you know, the sort of bum area, right? So that's actually, if I were to kind of like look through, see through, this would be the buttock area. But of course we can't see that, but that forms part of the thigh. So the thigh kind of comes out from there. And then we've got this inner part of the groin area. And then it does a bit of a strange thing. I'll just go and do the color on here. You'll see that if I just take the opacity up a little bit, you'll see that it kind of bends in. Let's go for a stronger color. You'll see it kind of bends in and then out. And then this kind of curves. So with this, we're looking at this kind of curve where it kind of comes forward like so. And this is going to form part of the knee. But then this other part, the outer part, this really curves out quite a lot and kind of dips in and then kind of comes in again. So again, it's not the easiest of shapes to kind of to draw. And then we kind of got this dent here before we kind of get to the knee. I might just zoom out a little bit just so we can get a bit more perspective on this. But essentially, the knee area as well is quite a tricky one to do. Now, instead of kind of doing a lot of this detail, what you can do is just make a suggestion of a knee. So it can just be something like that without defining it too much. And then this other part of the knee, or going down now more into the calf. Again, this is quite an unusual shape because you kind of got this calf area. You've got the shin, but then you've also got this calf area, which kind of comes in and out. And then this other part bows out like this and then down. And then this kind of comes down. So this is where we kind of get to the, if I just zoom in again, this is where we kind of get to the foot area. And again, feet are notoriously difficult to do. So we kind of got this ankle area here. And then what you can do is you can start to kind of give this a bit of an, again, what you've got is foreshortening. So what I mean by foreshortening is when you've got an object in front of another object, if it's part of the same object, that could be a human body, it could be anything, a tree, you're not going to see, you're seeing it, you're not seeing it in what's called an orthographic view, you're sort of seeing it at a perspective view, which means that you got the back, for example, you got the back heel here of the character's foot, but then you got the arch of the foot, and then you got the ball of the foot, and then you've actually got like the big toe. And it all happens because you're kind of seeing it in perspective. And so it makes it quite difficult to kind of see. And then, of course, you've got all the rest of the, you know, you got the toe there. So you got something like this going on where you'd have the toe, and like say that's where they're like the toenail, but also you got the knuckles. And then the rest of the toes would kind of go in. If you were to look at it, say a top view of this foot, it would probably go something like this. You'd have that there, and you've got the toe like so, but then the rest of the toes would be going like in a triangular way like this. So they kind of go, and of course not everyone's feet are like this, but generally speaking, it's kind of triangular. So it's partly to do with wearing shoes as well. But the feet have kind of gone a triangular thing, and basically you got the ball of the foot, but then it kind of comes in, and of course you've got the individual toes like so. And then that side of things, where it kind of comes to the heel, that's going to be relatively straight. But in here, you'll notice on your own feet, it kind of bows in and then kind of comes out again like so. So you could even be looking at like the sole of the foot. It wouldn't necessarily even be the top. The sole of the foot would could certainly look that way. When you're drawing it like this, it's extra tricky because basically it's foreshortening. So you're doing that, but you're sort of doing it in perspective. So it's going to be something like this kind of going on where you're just making a suggestion of toes, something like that. And if I sort of zoom out now, it's not looking too bad. It might be, the feet might be a little bit large. I'm not going to be too concerned with it for the time being, but that could probably do with like being sort of slimmed down a little bit, or maybe even shrunken down a little bit. So if you're doing this as a drawing, let's just go and take that out. Say, for example, this is the beauty of Photoshop. You know, you can basically shrink it down. So I could just sort of take that and maybe not have it so large. It was looking very, very, something more like that. I think that's kind of looking all right. Yeah. And then I'll just go and collapse that down onto that layer. All right. So we've got that going on. And again, the journey isn't over, you know, so we've got this going on here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, I'll probably use the lasso tool on it. And I'm not going to do the face, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do part of that there. Don't really need to do the navel. I'll do that part there, all the way down, all the way around. And I'll get that hand in, something like that. I'll press Command, or Command if you're on a Mac, Control and C and Control and V, and then Control and T. And then I'm going to right click with the mouse and flip that. So now I've kind of got that other part. And again, if you're drawing this, you could just literally just fold your piece of paper over again and do it that way. So something like that. And again, just have a look at, make sure that the proportions are looking all right. I could be tempted to maybe even just do a little bit of kind of like warp it a little bit. The chest is looking a little bit Let's look at a little bit, how can I say, small-ish. I'm not going to be too concerned about it. One of the things I can do is I can collapse that down and just maybe have a play with, if I just go and cut this out. So for example there, because I think it's getting in some of the drawing over here. So I'll go and cut this out, then paste that down there like so. And then what I'll do is I'm going to see about maybe warping it. So basically you can just kind of maybe bring some of these elements out, see if I can just manipulate it a little bit. I'm just sort of just tweaking it really. Again, I'm not going to get too fussed. Something like that. Okay. And then once you get to this stage, you're kind of ready for really sort of adding a little bit of sort of shading, but also thinking about clothing. So at this stage, I'm sort of tempted to look at maybe even using like one of my favorite tools, which is the smudge tool. And then essentially it goes like this, and you can do this with a pencil, of course. Is you look at like maybe just doing a little bit of sort of shading. So imagine like the lights, it's like a general light, but it's kind of coming from like that direction. And what we can do is we can just sort of begin to kind of shade some of this in, like so. I'm still going to resist putting any details, and I just want to kind of get the values in really. There's probably going to be a bit of a drop shadow underneath that chin and around the arms as well. So remember our illustrations with our shapes. Yep, remember that. So again, this is no different, right? So this is going to be hit with the light. So it's going to be sort of dark around the areas where the muscles are kind of dipping, but at the same time, it's fairly kind of light. It's probably going to be a little bit dark around these areas, and certainly around, like, let's say, the abdomen. It just helps me just get a sense of a weight with the character, making it look a bit more 3D. But you don't necessarily need to do that. I'm just kind of doing it just so I can kind of get a general idea. So that's not looking too bad. And again, around that kind of rib area. And then this silver bicep here. Around there as well. Something like that. And then looking at this leg, we're going to have a bit of a sort of shadow going on. So this kneecap as well, you know, and a bit of a something like that. And again, around this other thigh, the inner thigh, around the kneecap. A bit around the arm. Okay. And yeah, and then I'd kind of like, this is generally how I work, but I'll be doing just little bits where I'm kind of, I mentioned before about I was going to sort of collapse this down. So this is what I'm going to do. I might just sort of take a copy of that layer and then just kind of hide it. And then I'll collapse this down just so I haven't got anything. So it's just literally like that. And then just start kind of smudging parts of this kind of anatomy, or, you know, parts of the anatomy like the face. And again, I'm just sort of trying to create more of like an impression. And also thinking about values and shadows and things like that. So again, just very, very quickly move my way around. something like that. Around the forearm. Around there. And yeah, so, I don't necessarily need to kind of go over all of it, but I think just kind of softening some of the drawing really, and just again, sort of making way for the next phase, which is going to be doing a bit more rendering, particularly with the clothing. So that's going to form part of the next part of the video, where we're going to get into dropping the kind of opacity of this down, and then starting to kind of render some clothing over the top. But I think in general, I think that's looking okay. That's not looking too bad. This is, of course, this is like early stages of a drawing. This is just really just getting the kind of scaffolding in, as it were. So in the next part of the video, we're going to be looking at reducing the opacity, and then starting to think about putting some of this clothing in. So that'll be the next part of the video, folks. Okay, hi folks, welcome back to the next part of the video. So now we're going to start rendering our character, and we'll probably put some details in with the face, and also we're going to have a look at the clothing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to reduce the opacity of the drawing just been doing, because again, just using this as a guide, I'm going to create another layer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, and personally, I like to kind of get the face correct before I sort of go any further. So I'm going to start putting some kind of eyebrows in there. And putting some a bit more detail. Again, it's sort of quite impressionistic, but it is starting to kind of add more detail. So for example, like say with the nose, doing things like adding nostrils. Now I'm tempted to kind of give our character here a bit of a mustache, well, probably a bit of a beard. So we kind of got the mouth kind of going on there, and we've got the lip, and then we've got this. Let's have a look at. We've got this kind of cheekbones coming in, something like that, and then we've got the jaw there. And again, so I'm going to bring this kind of the character with this kind of beard, like a small beard, something like that. But again, this is just more of an impression. And then we've got the ears. Now the ears are only going to kind of stick out, so I'm going to come up to like level with the eyebrows, but you're not really going to see, a lot of the ears. You can sort of see the top of the ear. That is pretty much it, depending on the character that you got. But you don't want to have the ears kind of sticking out. And so we've got something like that kind of going on there. I think I'm tempted to kind of have like a bit of a hood on the character, but maybe there's like a bit of hair kind of coming down or something like that. And we're going to assume that they've got long hair, but you're not going to see it, because if we zoom out now, the character's going to have like, this kind of like hood, you can sort of see there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in again, and again we'll have like a hood. Let's zoom out again actually and just have a look for a bit of reference. So yeah, that kind of comes down like so. It's kind of like diamond shape. Okay. So we've got this kind of thing going on. So we've got this maybe like something like that. And then this kind of hood kind of comes down. Slopes down. So the fabric of it. In fact, what I might do is I might just take a wee copy of that, just so I've got it at the side. Let's say something like that. Copy that, and then I'll come up to, I'll bring that up to parallel to where we're doing our drawing. Just so we can actually get a bit more of an angle. Right, okay. And back to the character render. So there we go. So it's going to be something, yeah, we're going to have this kind of like, might just take that down a wee bit. Oh, sorry, I'm on the other layer, aren't I? There we go. So what I'll do is, right, have something like this going on. And obviously this is going to kind of come down and form part of this hood slash kind of tunic type thing going on. Like so. And then this is going to basically form then part of, like, we're going to have like something like a kind of pendant kind of going on there. And then you'd have all the folds. And this is where I think, like, you know, it's good to kind of have a bit of a practice with drawing kind of fabric, because you've got lots of kind of folds going on there. And these kind of straps, so the strap's going to kind of come out. I might make that a bit more kind of pronounced, and certainly on the other side as well. I'm not going to worry too much about the details for now. And then the way that the fabric is, if I actually go down and get like a full sample of that, let's go and select that first. And let's just get like a full sample of that. And let's bring it up to where our drawing is. There we go. Or maybe move that to the other side, somewhere like, say, there. I'm going to have that kind of, so this is where all the other drawing comes in. So you've got, you know, you've got this chest area. So you could say, well, the fabric's going to kind of come out, and maybe it's going to like slope over this shoulder like so. And we've got the fabric, because the fabric is being sort of pulled, you've got all these kind of like twists and curves kind of going on, where this is how the fabric's kind of, you know, this is how it's kind of hanging off of the body. But you can just sort of give this impression by, again, creating these kind of curved lines. And what you can also do is you can kind of fold. So for example, this is going over the muscles, but then it can follow around with the muscles, but then you can have like, it's almost like the fabric's kind of like creating another fold that's kind of coming out and then sort of coming down, and generally kind of following the line like so. So again, it's just about creating like an impression. Okay. And again, I'm going to do one side of this. I'm not going to do both. This is just mainly for sort of time. And perhaps I don't want to follow that entirely. I want to maybe have a look at some others. So this is like sort of quite a short top, and there's these kind of armband type things going on there, similar to kind of that, but just sort of different design. So I think what I'd be tempted to do is have now this would probably be something like fabric. Now that's probably going to come out slightly. You may not see much kind of, I mean, this could even be potentially metal, but it could also be leather. And with this part of the arm, I quite like this one here because it kind of curves around. So it could be that like maybe even here, we've got something like this kind of comes all the way down, but it comes out because obviously it's likely to be like leather or metal on the actual arm. So you've got his actual muscles, his actual arm there, but then this will be forming part of, like some kind of armor, some kind of leather, call it what you will. And the hand, again, that can have a glove on it, or it could just simply be, his hand, as it were. And again, just kind of going to refine that a little bit. And this is more of an impression. So again, just got those other fingers in there, got that kind of in the knuckles, of course. You can kind of give a suggestion of that. And then one of the other fingers kind of coming through like so. You don't really want to be spending time putting like things like fingernails in there because, again, you're just creating an impression. And when it comes to, again, with the chest area, I'm almost tempted to kind of like, I like kind of what's going on with this knight. There's like some kind of like breastplate type thing going on there. So I think what I'm tempted to do is have a look at maybe having a breastplate, something like that. Let's have a quick look at that again. So there's a lot going on here, but I'm just looking at this kind of lower part here. I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe what we'll do is we'll have something like that going on, where maybe what's going to go on is it's going to be possibly, when I say armor, perhaps something more akin to like leather, and create this kind of like almost like tiered. It's like leather, but it's like layered. So if you looked at it like side on, the leather would be almost like one bit layering and on the other bit, layering on the other bit, something like that. So we can have something like that kind of going on, and then another one. So this is like, in battle, maybe it's just tough leather. It wouldn't stop necessarily like a sword going through it, but it'd protect it, to give a certain amount of protection. So we've got something like that kind of going on. And again, that could have a pattern on it or whatever. And then maybe even, let's have a look at some other bits. This could potentially be chainmail here. So what you could have there is, it could be some form of chainmail. I don't know. Or it could simply just be like another bit of leather. So this entire thing is almost like a breastplate made from like layered leather, as it were. Again, you can sort of leave that fairly open. That could be like have straps, or maybe it's like buckled. So it's kind of like to be buckled on either side. It's got like a front and a back, something like that. But and then when it comes to this part, I quite like what's going on here. So this again would be protection. Now they could have a belt. I'm not sure if these characters kind of have like a belt with like daggers. Same thing with this, but I'd be tempted to have something maybe like a belt that kind of comes around to there. It could have something like some kind of like sheath for like a dagger. that kind of comes out, or maybe go something like that. And that could be where it maybe comes over, it actually comes over there. And maybe they've got two. So it could be like they've got like a dagger there, a dagger there. I'll just take some of this out because it's getting a bit, it's getting lost a little bit. So we'll just take a bit of that out for a bit of clarity. And again, you know, we have the sheath, and then the kind of what is it? The scabbard, whatever it is, the kind of protector on the knife, something like that. And then there could even be just like this kind of bit of cloth coming down there, say something like that. That could be, again, some kind of like buckle of some description going on there. So we're talking like leather for that. Again, we'll just repeat a lot of this. And then we've kind of got this, maybe even like an extension of that kind of going on, to say something like that. And when it comes to the leggings, they could just simply be like a bit like that, perhaps. So these would be like some form of leather. And again, we could kind of like, and maybe the character's kind of got boots. But what you'd have is kind of like, you'd have to kind of have a look at some reference here, but this would be some form of boot perhaps that's going on. I quite like these though, the way that's kind of tucked in, not so much those. So maybe it's they're kind of coming into just under the, just above the kneecap. So it could even go something like that. They could even sort of taper in. So this is just kind of, could be leather, could be like some form of cloth, heavy cloth of some description, something like that. And then the boot, and then what it could do is it could tuck in. So where the kneecap is, obviously that needs to bend. Then you can have that coming out like so. Now, obviously, you're not going to see feet, right? So it's just going to be more of a boot, but at least you've kind of got the shape of the foot. So you know that it kind of comes out to there. You know that the feet are going to be nestled somewhere like there, for example, within that boot. And I don't think that's looking too bad. Let's just go and zoom out and have a look at the rest of it. So, okay. So you got that there. We've got this thing with the knife going on. I might have a look at that, revisit that. And then what we can do is, to close out on this part of the video, we can just copy this. So again, I could use the lasso tool. And what I'll do is I'll take let's basically go down the middle, really. Oh, let's try that again. Maybe I'll use the polygonal tool instead. So we'll go down the middle. And then we'll copy here all the way to there. Still got part of the cape as well. So I'll just get this in here for now. Like so. I'll just undo that. Copy that over. And then I can use the arrows to bring that in to say something like, I'm still not totally convinced with those, with the shoulders. It seems as though it's more like something like that. I think will probably be a bit more suitable. The character's not like a big muscular kind of character, but it feels right. Maybe making it, it's just tweaking it out just a little bit. I think something like that might be all right. And then we can just take out, because obviously I don't want it kind of doubling up. So we're just going to take out part of this drawing as well. And so we've kind of got that going on. I'm not entirely convinced with the daggers. That could be something to maybe have a think about when you got the most of the sort of structure done. So I'd be tempted to kind of just take those out. You can leave them in if you like, but I think I'm tempted just to leave that for the time being. And you can basically just kind of fill the rest of this in like so. So basically, once you've kind of got that sort of established, you're ready to kind of pivot then to go in a number of ways. I did mention I was going to get part of the rest of the cape in, so I think I'll just, again, just very kind of quickly sort of sketch that in like so. I might just move these things out to the side now. And just make sure I've got that there. So you can go a number of ways with this. You could just continue shading it. That's certainly one option that you could try, where you've basically got, just working on the values. That's one option. So how you do that, I'll just do a little demonstration, but you could effectively say, take part of this. We could use something like take the lasso tool even. You can start thinking, okay, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll start adding a little bit of tone to this and looking at, say, parts. And you can start really anywhere on here. But let's say, for example, I'm looking at like part of the garment. And then what you can do is you can maybe even use like a soft brush. Let's say something like that. I'll take the any dynamics off. So I just want like a soft round brush. So just take the dynamics off. Take the opacity down. And then what you can do is you can just basically start feathering around the edges. Leaving your drawing in. You could create another layer as well. You don't have to go over the top of it, but I'm just doing it again just for time's sake. And just adding a bit of sort of 3D quality, really. So we do something like that and then go Control D. It just gives it a bit of tone. Can maybe even have a look at, so this is like a hooded character, right? So with the opacity down maybe a little bit more, and maybe a good part of this is kind of in shadow. So that would mean that you're not going to get perhaps like a clear picture of his, if the light's kind of coming from down there, the part of his face is going to be kind of in shadow, like this kind of thing, whatever. And again, it's entirely up to you how you do this. But and then, like, for example, if the light is kind of coming from down there, you could almost say like, okay, let's just do, say, part of this arm. And then using that, again, just to kind of give it a bit more of a sort of 3D quality. Say something like that. You see what, you can get some quite good effects with it, really. And then maybe part of this as well, this arm. In fact, all of that. And say all of that, this might be because it's underneath this cape. It's going to be a bit more shaded, right? Because it's not totally exposed to the to the light. So this is going to be overshadowing it. So again, that's, you know, that could be, you know, and you can continue going down this route of just basically isolating now just kind of parts of the drawing, like here, for example, and just doing exactly the same, just working your way around, adding a bit of a drop shadow there, Control D on that, and then do another part, maybe this other part here with this kind of leather area here. And again, just add in like a drop shadow because of this kind of layering. And it kind of gives it like a bit of a 3D quality. And basically you just continue working into it like so. So I'm going to close out with this part of the video. And in the next part of the video, I'm going to create a time lapse. I'm going to basically continue progressing through the painting and make some changes and just show you the evolution of the character all the way up to basically creating a black and white version of it and then some color behind it to close out. Okay, folks, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you found it informative. It's given you some ideas about how you can approach designing your characters in the future and all the different methods from creating the structure from geometric shapes to creating more organic forms, and then finally through to rendering it and putting some finishing touches on there. So thanks for watching, and I shall catch you in the next video. Okay, take care. Bye for now.